Good morning. We'll call this meeting to order. This is the November 7th Riverfront Design Committee meeting. We'll begin with roll call, please.
Scott Howard.
Here.
John Postick.
Present.
Michelle Dean. Here. Jonathan Heisel.
Here.
John Joyce. Don Cathberite. Barbara Larson. Here. And Dana Templeton.
Present.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Item 2, approval of the minutes from October 3rd. Entertain a motion.
I move to approve the minutes.
Second.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes approved. Item 3, cases withdrawn. None. Item 4, continuance request. None. Item 5, consent docket. Would ask for entertain a motion to approve or not. It's a consent item.
I move to approve the consent item.
Second.
Second. Any discussion? Motion approved. Oh, I'm sorry. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion or consent docket approved. Item 6, cases for individual consideration. 6A, case item SRCA 19-00014 at 1100 South Robinson Avenue. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. As you can see, the applicants are here. I had somebody make a comment they had a lot of reading to do for today's meeting, and I jokingly said there was a lot of writing to do for today's meeting. This particular case is a little unusual due to the fact that there was work done previously that did not come before you that should have, in addition to work that was done at the direction of the fire marshal that didn't have to come to you because of danger to vehicles and pedestrians because the brick was falling off. So I tried to explain that as clearly as I could in the staff report. So what you're here today to actually take action on is work that was done previously by the owners after they bought it. Some things kind of just happened while they were cleaning up the site, and as you could tell from their write-up, there's a wall that used to span the two buildings literally just fell down, and so they cleaned it up. Most of you are probably familiar with that location, and I need to give a shout out to one of my staff people, Cameron, who is our drone operator and provides us with these fantastic photos, which is the only way you can get a real good read of the site and the surrounding area. So you had what used to be the two-story building on the corner, which looks kind of really interesting now with the second floor gone, and so you're seeing the structure. And then you have the one-story building, which I refer to as the easternmost building, and then the area in the middle, and then the brick that they did salvage from the second floor when they had to dismantle it. And so, as you can tell, it's directly across the street from what's going to be the south portion of Scissortail Park. And here, this is 10th Street, which runs along the north side. So I think getting that view, and then you can see literally the park is all laid out there and how prominent this is up at the corner, looking all the way back down to the feed mill there at the tracks. And you can get a better view of the bricks that they salvaged that I referenced in here, and they referenced that they're going to be reusing on this project. So there is a lot of work that's in here, and I'm just going to go over some of the issues that we had that resulted in the recommendations from staff. There were a lot of references to the rehabilitation guidelines, which we use infrequently, but every now and then it is appropriate to use, as well as the intensive level survey that's referenced in here. This was, once again, a site that was considered contributing to a potential district called Hubcap Alley. Obviously, we've lost the western side of Hubcap Alley when the buildings were demoed for the park, but we still have buildings on the east side. It is not a historic district. There is no move at the present time by any property owners or the city to establish that district. And so the issues that we discussed, one dealt with some of the issues with the corner building. So here's a view that I happen to have from a previous case, so you could see what the second floor looked like before the wind literally decided to remove it. And so now we have this without the second floor, but they've kept the structural component. This is the north facade, and then you can see this is the eastern facade, but it allows you to see the concrete structure. And then you have the easternmost building, which is not going to change. The openings are staying the same. And then that right there is the western facade of that easternmost building. What I wanted to go down to was the proposal that they had, and they had provided, this is a photo from the intensive level survey that was done back in 2012, and this is the historic photo that they provided, and you can see there was some work that had been done on the north. I found it fascinating that was how you got to the second floor, and it was all out in the right-of-way, it was off the property line, and eventually that was kind of enclosed, which I never saw the building with that enclosed. It must have looked very strange.
It's there in that middle photograph.
Okay, that one, right? Oh, that's right, right there, right there. And so they provided some photos of the process and a very good description of what they had done and what they proposed to do, and I'm wanting to get... So in this layout, this is the existing one-story building, and this was what had been the two-story. And then they have two new additions, I guess you could say. One is the garage structure, and one is what will become the access up to the second floor of the corner building for the residential unit. And so one of the things that the guidelines talk about is keeping the openings the same, not creating new openings, keeping the material the same. And in their proposal, the windows are a little different size, roughly in the same location. The biggest issue staff had with this facade was instead of reusing the brick, using limestone. And so it resulted in staff recommending a condition that be brick instead of the limestone. The other issue that staff had dealt with the north facade and the windows being a totally different size, openings being in different location, and staff felt very strongly that it really changed the character of the building, and we felt that we could resolve the issue, staff and the property owner, and we recommended that you allow staff to work with the property owner on the location and the size of the openings. I think it would really benefit to have some bigger openings like were originally on that north facade. It would give it some more interest. There's a lot of brick expanse. I did ask about if because they're adding this cornice across, and I said, well, could you bring the cornice across and tie it in with this one? But because of the grade, there's a really big slope on that road. If it came across, it's not going to tie in, and you don't really put those at an angle, and it would look a little odd stair-stepping it down. But staff is recommending approval with those two conditions, and I could go over those again if you needed me to. But I felt the applicant could shed some light on what they were hoping to achieve with this design that they have for that building.
Okay. Thank you, Laura. Would the applicant like to introduce themselves and tell us about your project?
I'm Vicki Van Stavern. We currently live in Edmond, moving to Oklahoma City, and my husband...
Don Narkamy, 601 Holidale in Edmond also.
So we bought this property actually in 2011 in April, and precisely because it was going to be on eventually the park, the south part of the park, And our goal was to substantially rehabilitate these two historic buildings and make them useful again. We never considered doing a historic restoration because we wanted to improve, and especially in terms of energy efficiency and that sort of thing. We registered it as a LEED project and paid the fees in order to start that process. But we wanted it to be attractive, energy efficient, and comfortable and clean inside. And so that requires quite a bit of change to what was there initially. This property had been abandoned for over 20 years. The last people that owned it had gotten it on a mechanics lien. There had been 4 tiny little apartments upstairs, and they did a renovation, looks like maybe in the 70s, where they went in and hung acoustical ceilings. They got rid of every window, every door, and put in, as you could see on the historical photos, some or what, not historical, but when we bought it, T111 siding in the top and bottom of the windows and a little aluminum strip window in there. So there really wasn't much left but a lot of debris because vagrants had camped in there and they had started fires and burned holes through the roof. Everything was wet and decayed. Those 4 apartments with their furniture and all their appliances were still in there. John will attest to that. First thing we did was call John and say, come and look at this before we bought it. So we started off trying to clean it up with a bang, and before we got the MAPS 3 had just been passed and they didn't have the schedule out yet, and then we realized it was going to be, at that time, I think 2019 before the South Park was done. Now it's 2021. We were a little unprepared for the amount of vagrancy and vandalism and theft that we were going to encounter. So we finished our cleanup, and as Laura said, that concrete wall that we wanted to keep just for security between the 2 buildings just fell over. The vestibule, the stair was gone, all of that was already gone. When they took out 10th Street and Robinson to do the I-40 realignment, and then they started putting it back, they graded 10th Street above our buildings so that all the water was going to flow down into our buildings. And so, frantically we're calling ODOT and the city and different people. Russell was on the planning department at the time. And the engineer said, well, we just assumed all those buildings would be torn down. So we assured them we didn't intend to tear them down. Then they said, well, we're going off that vestibule. We're going off the height of that vestibule, which was taller than inside the building. And on the north bay, there was we called it a stage because the building is submerged about 30 inches on the northwest end. And so you came in a door on that side and you stepped down into the building and then down again another 30 inches, and it slopes to the back. I think it was originally a garage on that first floor. The picture you showed, Laura, that had the back of the building,
That one?
yes. You see that railing up there? It looks like that's where, yeah. It looks like there were sliding doors that maybe went across there, but there was never a wall on that side of the building. Nothing was there, and it was enclosed by that concrete block that fell down. But so that was just open. But so anyway, we took down that slab and that vestibule to get ODOT and the city to regrade the road so that it was sloping away from our building and not. The people to the east of us didn't fight, and the road is above their property, and it floods every time it rains. The water just runs right into that building.
That would be down here.
That white one down there.
That one.
Yeah. So, that's kind of the history. I mean, the people that got it on the mechanics lien were mechanical contractors, so the whole thing was full of old toilets and urinals and sinks and air conditioner ducts and PVC pipe, and my husband is a hoarder, and we had a really hard time convincing him to give up any of that stuff, but no one wanted 1970s plumbing fixtures. They don't meet code. There wasn't anything to do with them. So we got to this point, and we shored up the upstairs, and we're at the code request of code people. We boarded up all of the garage doors that had been put up there and put the no trespassing signs, and we're waiting for the area to come around a little because we certainly didn't want to put any windows in until things started improving. Then in August, when we had what they called the inland hurricane with up to 94-mile-an-hour winds, the north and south wall of the second floor blew over. It was quite a shock. And so we called John. He came down and looked at it with us, and we all agreed that those walls needed to come down. So we saved the brick so that we could rebuild. And although it was devastating, we were really, there are some upsides because now we can build a better insulated wall up there with continuous insulation around the outside uninterrupted by studs. We can get a rain screen under the brick, some things that will really make it a better building. Now, if you look at the far north end window, you can see that the openings are 7-foot openings, 7 feet wide, 7 feet tall. And there was a row of bricks in the middle of 2 separate window frames. So altogether there were 38 windows on that second floor. And that's a lot of windows and a lot of money. And so what we're proposing to do is to take those 2 sashes and put them together into one frame, but still have the 2 sashes that would open to the inside. So they're in exactly the same place. We moved them up a tiny bit because they didn't meet code as far as distance from the floor on the inside. And so we would have either had to have a railing across the windows or a lower roof for someone to fall on. So now by moving them up 1 brick, you know, at least but they're still the same height. So that the windows are in the same place. They're basically the same size. They're just don't have the brick in the middle of them. And then on this lower level, you know, we never considered this a restoration project, and we wanted to have the street front, the retail space, to be more attractive than what was there because it doesn't look very good. This property is in 4 different design districts. In addition to the Scenic River Overlay and Western Gateway, which is your purview, it's in Downtown Design District 2, those guidelines that were accepted in 2015, and North Shore. And so in my narrative, and I'm sorry you had so much to read, but I took all of the guidelines from all of those 4 things and put them into one document and then tried to address each one of those things and how we either met them or attempted to meet them. So one of the things in the Downtown Design District guidelines does address the storefront. Robinson Street is designated as general urban, is that what?
And just for clarification, she's referring to the Downtown Development Framework right now, the
Yes.
DDF. This is located in Scenic River and the Downtown Design District, so we use both of those guidelines. Scenic River kind of trumps it a little, which is why you guys see it. It does not go to the Downtown Design District. But we also have to consider the DDF, which is what Vicki's referring to right now.
So the biggest change in the DDF guidelines that we had to deal with was where it said ground floor must be delineated from upper floors through design, materials, awnings, floor height, window height, or a combination of above. Then it says at least 60% of building is transparent, 30 inches and 12 feet above the sidewalk. Well, because of the concrete structure, we didn't have that much room, so we made the windows, the glazing, as big as it could possibly be to the limits of the concrete structure, and got to 52% as opposed to 60%, which that guideline calls for. But the delineation is done with the cast stone or limestone. I'd like to use limestone, but it's possible it could be cast stone. It would look the same. But I'm hoping to be able to use the limestone as lintels above the windows, because then we won't have to use metal, and we're trying to avoid thermal bridging on that exterior wall. So that's kind of where that came from. Also, in the historic resource identification form that Laura included in her mail-out, when it talked about this building, it said that it had a brick exterior with a stepped parapet and cast concrete parapet and sills, which we're keeping. And then on the other, where it says decorative details, it has a stepped parapet and cast concrete parapet and sills. So we weren't trying to build this back exactly like it was before. We really don't want to double the number of window frames we're having to put in, and we want a more attractive street front. Now, on this north side, 10th Street is designated as landscape zone. It says a soft-scaped buffer required if building is set back from pedestrian zone. So we had proposed trees along that side of the building. Yes, there. Putting 3 ginkgo biloba trees there, and then landscaping underneath it as an understory to make that a heavily landscaped area that's next to the entry to the residence. Most of that wall is going to be covered up. The windows are in the same place, upstairs. Where the center window is, that was the door into those apartments upstairs from that external staircase. That width is the same. They're all shorter because the view from up there is of a whole lot of road. All you see is the Robinson Street going like this up over I-40. The top part of the windows has a nice view of the skyline, but the bottom part of the windows doesn't. And so that was number one reason. The other reason is that on the interior, those are bedrooms, and because there are windows on every single exterior wall, you know, big windows all the way around, there's no place to put a bed. So this way, these windows are the same width as the other windows. They look smaller because the bay spacing is a little greater on this side of the building. They're just shorter. But I don't think that facade you're going to see much because of the landscape that will be there. We would like to keep it the way it's designed. And so that's what we're requesting.
I have a question. As far as the door locations on 10th and Robinson, I assume, did you relocate those due to accessibility issues?
Yes. The doors initially were through this north side. The second door that was on the west facade, I don't know if that was original or not. You can tell from the sills that are still there and the size of the windows that at one time it must have had exactly the same fenestration below as above. It was just flat, 2 windows, 2 windows, 2 windows, 2 windows. But it's above grade. I mean, it's way up here. And so the only way to be able to enter the building on grade without steps or ramps is to move the entry clear to the south end. And so that's why. So that's the entry there. Eventually, because there is more height there, it's only 7 feet at the north end to the top of that window, but at the end down here, there's more like 10 feet. We'd like to eventually come back to you and request an awning over the entry at that end, just to further designate that that's where you enter the building. The egress is out the other side in that vestibule, the new vestibule, which is also on grade. So that kept us from having to try to figure out ramps and steps into the space.
Of which would have had to have occurred along the sidewalk or inside the building if...
Right. And the building is not that big. You know, there's about 2,500 square feet on each floor. And if we were ramping 30 inches down, what is that, Dana? That'd be 30 feet. Yeah, it's a lot of ramp.
Laura, do you mind going back to the section view, looking at the north elevation? But okay, that sheet. I was curious, go back one.
Oh.
Yeah, that one there, I believe.
Okay.
I'm just curious, there was discussion about could you continue the limestone face along the north elevation just so that the Robinson elevation wraps the corner. And a lot of times when you change materials, I'm just curious, if you look at the bottom graphic, how does that limestone stop and then the brick starts on the north elevation? I mean, a lot of times I see it wrap at least a little bit.
Right. And at one time I did have it like
corner.
there. You can see a little bit of how the cornice detail comes out, but I greatly simplified that limestone so that it's just really flat. I want to kind of keep that industrial look. Originally, I was thinking about using cast stone and shapes, but it's basically, since we were trying to get the windows to the guideline requirements, a column. There's basically a column. Yeah, there. That kind of shows it.
Just wondering if you had one here that would show it.
So there's the limestone makes a column, and then the brick would just butt up to it on the back, but the cornice piece would return and stick out a little bit.
Questions from the committee?
Laura, I have a question for you. Attached was this map that indicates Hubcap Alley Historic District, and both of these buildings are listed as contributing. And I know that you mentioned that there was not a consensus or an intent for this to become a historic district. But at this point in time, we don't know that for a fact.
What I will say is, on the part of the city has not done anything other than accept this intensive level survey. Included in the survey was a recommendation by the consultant for the city for several potential historic districts. This was one of them. So the city has not done anything further than that, and none of the property owners have approached the city about doing that, and I'm not aware that anybody has started putting that together.
Okay, so if this remains as a Hubcap Alley Historic District in the future, and this project right now is the first one with any interest of redevelopment, it's going to set a precedence for the look of the historic district should somebody else want to.
What I would say to that is we lost almost half of the contributing buildings when the demolition was approved to allow the South Park. And so there has not been a reevaluation of what's left, which is what's on the east side. There has not been an evaluation of the condition of the structures. One of the things very visible from the drone shots was just from the top view down, just how bad a shape some of those buildings are in. Some of them, I mean, I didn't realize so many roofs are missing or they're like collapsing or whatever. So could the district actually become an official district in the future? It is possible. I don't know that for a fact. And would this, if this building were evaluated today as it currently is, I don't know if it would be considered contributing because of losing the second floor. The little building really hasn't changed much, so it would probably still be considered contributing. You can have non-contributing buildings in a district. We have several non-contributing buildings in Automobile Alley. So the location of non-contributing buildings would not totally preclude the establishment of a district. But I would also say that I'm not aware of, in the 4 years of intensive level surveys, there were several historic districts that were recommended. And I don't know if any of them have actually been established, but I'm going to leave that there could have been a few. I'm just not that familiar with certain areas of town, just the ones that I work with. And we've had some residential as well as some commercial and industrial recommended districts.
Right. Well, I appreciate all the research on the downtown area and any type of historic feel for some of those buildings. My only concern at this point is pulling in somebody else's vision into something that we're calling a Hubcap Alley Historic District. And I know
potential.
that...
We'll put potential in front of that because it's not a historic district. It hasn't been established. It potentially could be one.
Okay. And I'm just saying that because we were given this map. So I'm making the assumption that there is a plan to make it such. And if there's not a plan to make it such, I don't see the value in matching what was there prior.
And at the present time, there is not a plan to establish the district.
But we're going to the extent of using existing brick and making an attempt to make this renovation look like what the building looked like prior.
Based on the guidelines staff has to use when we evaluate structures, we could not turn a blind eye to the rehabilitation guidelines that were established by the department however many years ago it was. And so based on that document, staff is making a recommendation for the committee's consideration.
Go ahead.
I do have one question, Vicki. On the trees that you're going to be planting on the north elevation, do you know the height of those? Are you purchasing them at a certain height, or were you just going to wait for them to grow? The ginkgo biloba trees on the north elevation, Have you had any plans to purchase them? I'm just, for me, driving south, that would be the first elevation that I would see.
You do see it, yes.
Heading south?
No, we have not purchased them, and
Oh, I have an idea.
yeah. We have ginkgo trees in our front yard right now, and we absolutely love them. How big were they when we planted them? Maybe 10 feet,
Okay.
12 feet. And now they're taller than the house, but it's been 18 years, I think,
Okay.
that they've been growing.
But my point to that was that one that you will, driving south, that'll be the first elevation you see. And I know it's a north elevation, and nobody likes to have a lot of windows on their north elevation just because of the weather. But personally, I would love to have a lot of sun in my room, but I understand that it's north elevation, there's going to be trees in the way. But that also, for me, I was also of the mind of wanting that cornice to continue around. But now that there's going to be trees in the way, we really, do we need to have that cornice continue? So.
You know, I actually had that. I've gone through a lot of iterations of this thing.
Yeah.
And I did have that at one point, trying to continue that around. But it just didn't work out.
In this elevation, it would break up the facade, and where this kind of looks more industrial or warehousey, the front facade is so grand, and this just didn't look like it kind of went with it. But if you're going to have trees.
Right. Laura, would you show what it looked like before the second floor fell down? I think you had a picture of that.
Oh, one that I took?
Yeah.
Or what you showed, I don't know if it
There
was
is
one of
one.
ours, but
Let's see. Because I had that one. That's the
no,
only
of
one I
the
had in
north
this.
side. The north
The north side, okay, so it's going to be one of these others. Bear with me.
Because it's very random, and it's always...
So you're wanting a better view of that side?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, you had one.
No, that's the...
Well, there you can kind of see it on the bottom there.
This one?
Yeah.
I think there's
That's-
another one somewhere. I saw another image.
Seems like there was another.
There's
Well,
kind of-
there's the one that you had in your stuff. Is that the one you were thinking of?
So it had the same windows on, the east and west side of that wall, a shorter door in the middle, because that was a 6'8" door. Windows go up to about 8 feet. And then on the bottom, there's the same, well, they were bricked in, but 2 window
Yeah, the
openings.
picture on the bottom we have.
But they don't line up with
Right
one
this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for.
Okay.
And then one single window, and none of these line up with anything that was above it, and then where the door was that's been bricked in. I mean, it's just completely random.
Then you have the stem wall, which, if the cornice wrapped around, I don't know how far it would go, but the stem wall would show regardless.
Yeah, but the facade is above that, so.
Yeah.
But you're right, Dana, it does just sort of end there. But, there are so many buildings like that, that it's like combing the front of your hair and not combing the back, which I may have done this one, I'm not sure. But you see that all the time. Not that I necessarily think that's good, but having a different material on the front where people are walking down the street doesn't really bother me. And since there is that material at other places on the building originally, I think it ties in.
I think the trees will distract or hide it.
I have one question. On the ground floor retail use, I'm sorry, did you mention that you intended for the ground floor to be a retail use?
Yes.
Is it intended, the layout of the space, to just have one tenant in there?
Yes. Now, I did add a second toilet so that if someone wanted to put a small office in there, they would be able to do that. So it could be office space as well. But it's not that big. And so, I was thinking one tenant. for that space.
2,500 square feet could be a fairly good size for multiple tenants in a downtown environment, especially fronting the park. I'm wondering if your point is well taken of a ramp inside the building would take up a significant amount of square footage. But I have seen tenants that are okay with that in order to get a smaller space. If you had a 1,000 square foot, 1,500 square foot tenant space, there's a lot wider range of potential tenants that could be looking for that space. And so I just bring all this up because this is going to be fronting the park, and having multiple different tenants in that space would make it a more lively and active building with just more activity going on. And so I would push to consider the addition of an additional doorway at the north end of the west facade, or at least the potential that there could be in order to not lock this building into just one tenant, but have the possibility that it could be multi-tenants.
We have had some situations downtown where we've had a grade differentiation. The city's come in and done sidewalks, and we've ended up with ramps and stoops and railings in the right-of-way so that they could have access. The new Jimmy's Egg, I don't know if you've been to that one, they had an issue, and so we have the ramp that's actually in the right-of-way. We had one by the Thai Kitchen that's downtown. I can't think of what street that's on, but the back part of their building, they'd never really used it because you couldn't get there from the sidewalk. And so it got complicated, but we were able to work out a way. We had suggested do it on the inside, but we know it eats up so much real estate when you have to do, ramps and you set back the entrance. So we've done several. This is not one we had evaluated for that. It's possible that at some future time that could actually be looked at. The main issue there is we just have to have the minimum width of sidewalk remaining that's not taken up by the ramp. So we still have to be able to allow the pedestrian traffic, the through traffic, to proceed.
Sure.
So, but that's not something we had looked at, but it's possible that it could work to allow for another access point further north.
Well, and I will,
Right. Right, where potentially the north half of the interior, you raise up the floor slab, and the south half of the interior could be sunken down.
we just took it down to get it all level. And the floor inside slopes too, because I think it was a garage. Actually, the roof of that building, the first floor, also slopes. And it's been suggested that maybe it was originally a one-story building, and that was the roof. And then they built the apartments at another time. But you can enter at grade off that vestibule on the north. So if you did want to divide this, you'd still have to be able to get to the toilets. But if you did want to divide it, there is a second entry there.
It was really just a suggestion.
I have another comment. I'm going to come back to the design and pulling in the historic guidelines from elsewhere. I'm looking at the guideline 3.1 that states that the alterations to be compatible with the traditional character of the property, and I don't see that in the elevations. And so I also find that there was a recommendation to work with the staff on utilizing the brick, and I'd like that to be considered as well.
Well, the one for the brick, that was staff recommended to condition that instead of limestone, it be brick. The condition to work with staff was on the openings. But
I don't think that these limestone columns are in traditional character of the property, is my point. And I understand where you got it from. I understand where you pulled it from. I'm just looking at the considerations.
If we did that,
Well, I
it's
think
kind
that
of-
before we can approve it, I mean, I wouldn't think personally that it is our intent to approve something based on your intent, on what you want to do. I think that before we can approve it, I think we need to see it again. I don't think we can say, yes, we understand that you're on the right track and you're going to move forward, and yes, we approve it. But that's just my opinion.
What I was going to say is if we did bring the brick down to the front there, all that brick has to come off. You know, it's very
Right.
badly damaged. It's been sandblasted. I had intended all along to take where this limestone is and remove the brick. That's why we stripped the upper floor as well as we could, using an environmentally friendly stripper and big booms and water pressure. But the bottom, that paint is like 1/4 of an inch thick. It'd have to come off and be put back up, and then you've got a completely flat facade on the front of the building, which does not meet the downtown design framework.
I have a question to Laura as far as from the planning standpoint. When you have a historic development, but not quite historic, I mean, it's not registered, so how do you consider painted brick? Because a lot of the old buildings in Hubcap Valley weren't the greatest of buildings. And
So we have a guideline against painting unpainted brick. It's a guideline only. From the perspective of, I've worked with several cases before the downtown design district on unpainted brick. There have been a few that have been approved because of, say, it was for a sign in a certain location on a building, and it was apparent that sign was to go there, and the brick was different for whatever reason. We have had a non-contributing building on Broadway in Automobile Alley wanted to paint, and they got denied because of it could impact the district. That brick happened to be very cool. It had this iron in it. I didn't realize how cool the brick was till I went out to take pictures. So each case is looked at individually. If this building had been painted, and you can tell that, and if a building has been painted, we allow it to be repainted. If they were to come in and let's just say hypothetically they came before you and you approved a project and it was not painted brick, and then they came back at a later date and wanted to paint it, we'd have to bring that back to you because of the guideline not to paint unpainted brick. The rehabilitation guidelines are not guidelines that say only use if they're doing tax credits or only use if the building's on the National Register. We use that as guidelines when we evaluate work done on older buildings like this. So that's not to say that their proposal is a bad proposal. That's to say we reviewed it against these guidelines, and this is staff's opinion. Obviously, as a designer, the applicant has explained why certain design components were proposed.
Right. And again, I'm speaking on behalf of just design experience. I'm not an architect, but could limestone or cast stone be used at the Robinson entry and not along the entire length of the building?
Yes.
I mean, I would hate to restrict, we have this opportunity. It's going to be redeveloping as a new district, basically. I mean, we already have a brick town, and I understand they're going to reuse brick. I just think we're going to see a lot of new development in this entire area, and I mean, I like the look. But is that something that would satisfy staff and you if we use some limestone but
In
not?
my comment, the new vestibule entrance, second floor, has the columns, and possibly they could look at maybe tying that entrance in similar to this. It would definitely draw a lot of attention. You had mentioned about coming back for an awning to draw attention, which we would, wholeheartedly support, pending the design, obviously. But the different material would also draw attention to it. I mean, that would definitely be something, and then if the rest of it was brick,
So
trying to envision that.
if we did that, one of my concerns is having enough brick. A lot of it's broken. The fact that the building fell down, in a way, helps us, because I hadn't thought about this, but when Chris Cates with Midwest Wrecking came out, he said, I think we should try to save this to reuse it. And I said, it is in such bad shape. And he said, well, just turn it over. I'm like, duh. Okay. So, and I talked to Steve Lackmeyer, and he said that they had done that on a building in Plaza District, and that was very successful. They took the brick down. Back side of the brick looks just like the front, but it's pristine. So that's what we intend to do. I have found some of that brick at Fox, but it's extremely expensive. They're $2 a piece. I found some that looks the same but doesn't have a bevel. This brick has a bevel around the edges on the front. So I don't know if we'll have to try to do a blend maybe in order to get enough brick to do what we're proposing now. Finding more brick like that to do this bottom section, because it's pretty much all gone. Where they put in those garage doors, it's really funny because you can see the shorter lintel where the opening was the same size from above, and then they just took the brick off. So the upper brick is just hanging there. I don't know why it hasn't fallen off. Some has, but
Staff anticipated that they probably weren't going to have enough brick, and that was something that we had talked about. There are different ways to use the old and then have new, and if it doesn't match, that you can, she was talking about blending or alternating or sometimes contrasting in certain areas, really add to the design impact. So I figured at whatever point they got started on it, we probably will be having a more intense brick discussion. But the generic, in here when we talk about brick, we weren't specific, so we were wanting to give them as much flexibility as possible, because some of that brick they might not be able to reuse, too.
But let me ask you this question. If we did that, as Scott suggested, and brought the brick down and had just the limestone at the entry, would you be amenable to doing same-size openings below as above, like was originally there, even though it doesn't meet the glazing requirements from the framework?
That's a guideline. And I think the guidelines are just to help us, and sometimes you concentrate more on some guidelines than others depending on the location or that type of thing.
Because I'd very much like to not have so much west-facing glass. And the glass we're using, the dynamic tinting glass, is very expensive. And if I could have windows on the bottom that were more like is in, there was a, just within that opening, you can see, back to where you were, Laura.
Well, I was going back to that one.
Okay,
So
if it was that size window, would...
Because I think you were saying that these were the openings that were made wider, and that did they all used to be...
Like that.
Because this one and this one are clearly the same width, and you can see the lintels there.
And you can see the two sills below, too, where there were two and two. So,
I think so you're talking about a more symmetrical look, which I think it could be,
and less glass.
I mean, because clearly that was a size, and it was directly below, and was actually, it almost looks a little narrow, with the lower
Well,
one's
it's
a little
because
narrower.
they framed it out.
Okay.
They brought in a wood frame, but the brick opening is identical to what's above.
And then it would look more like brick columns in between the windows? Is that what you were,
Well, it would look more like a big,
Extend first.
right, all
it's
the way
just
up?
exactly the same. It's just flat and exactly the same first floor and second floor.
I do have one more. I mean, we're worried about the brick. Is on the east elevation on the interior courtyard, is that something that we could extend the stucco a little bit higher and maybe collect some more brick off of that facade?
Give me a minute, let me get to that elevation. There.
Not necessarily that one.
This
but
one?
this one. This is on the interior courtyard where the other elevation kind of is seen from the south, even though there's a building that butts up to, they show that wall on that south view, bottom left corner. That one it's seen if you're driving north on the Robinson. But if you go to the next page, the elevation south, number 2 on A3.
Oh, sorry. 3.
3.
Okay.
See see where the big X is, and that's where the adjacent building attaches to it. But right there, that is seen if you're driving north. So that brick is visible. But the brick on the interior courtyard above those, what I would call a nano wall or the horizontal sliding wall system.
This wall right there.
Yeah. Could they possibly change the elevation of the stucco, move it up or something, and maybe up to the bottom of the window, and then salvage that much more brick to use somewhere else?
Now, that brick is on the ground now, so that brick can be used.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Just make more stucco so you'll have more brick to use on the front.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
She was saying, like, just go up with the...
Maybe not all the way up. Maybe all the way up if we would allow it, but maybe up to the bottom of the windows there where you'd have at least.
That wall won't have that much visibility.
That's what I'm saying.
You see it pretty clearly from Shields, and you see it pretty
That's true.
clearly from I-40 when you're coming from the east to the west. You
Get
see
to the
that
drone
side of
shots.
the building.
Okay, so that would be the wall going up here. Mm-hmm. Okay. I forgot about that view from Shields, that's right. You used to be able to see the building when the second floor was still there.
Yeah. And one of the things that's really visible that we've noticed before the second floor came down is what you see is the roof. And we do intend to do a rooftop garden. We'd like to do a green roof. We're designing it structurally for a green roof. But that would be a later phase, just for financial reasons. But we do intend to have an attractive roof. And when I come over that I-40 bridge, that's what I see, is that roof.
Or you did see.
I did, yeah. Now I see that.
You can see that better.
Can you identify yourself, sir, please? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm John Joyce, 832 Northwest 40th Street in Oklahoma City. So while we're looking at this picture, Vicki made the comment earlier about there being a question as to whether there was originally a second story, and if you're like me, you hear something like that and you kind of roll your eyes, think, yeah, right. But if you look at that, what you see those little humps there on the roof, what that is, that's a concrete slab, and they came in on the inside at some point. There are also concrete beams that span east to west across that lower floor, and they'd come in and they'd added this big steel column, which in 35 years of practice I'd never seen, a steel column being added under a concrete beam. And one of the reasons you would never do that is because you'd be worried that it would punch through because it wouldn't be designed. And so they actually came in and thickened that roof slab, what I'm calling a roof slab, at those points, to kind of counteract that. And so, and like she said, the roof was, the second floor did slope. It was all, and it's still going to have to be built up with wood to give us a level floor. So a lot of these considerations when we're talking about historic, and I'm all about that, but you really have to question everything about that second floor addition. And the other point I would just make while I'm up here is just that you kind of have to see these other buildings, especially those buildings directly to the south, to kind of appreciate just what sort of shanty sort of condition that they're in. And the idea that this building is somehow in any way even representative of the buildings on the the east side of the street is really, I don't think is true. Thanks.
Okay.
That is true. There's nothing else down there that looks like this at all. There is one really cool rock building that's about 13th or 14th that you can't really see from the street because they've, cobbled a bunch of stuff around it. But other than that, it's pretty dismal.
I do have one more question. I'm not really sure if I'm clear on what was suggested or recommended on changing that west elevation. Was it removing the columns, the limestone columns, and the limestone or cast stone to maybe make the entrance more prominent? I'm not sure, and that's why we were looking at getting more brick, but I was wondering of the cost implications of purchasing a $2 brick versus not purchasing the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 columns. Is that what we were discussing? Or, removing those columns from the elevation? Was that what?
I think my comment was in regard to the staffing, talking about the cladding material on Robinson being different, being not brick.
Which would include the columns, the limestone, which you see up here, and
Right.
those columns were part of that limestone design.
And then there was a recommendation of a discussion about creating that same entry look, maybe, that they used.
Well, what the comment was made, of just maybe doing the entrance with the limestone and the new two-story vestibule, which is to allow access to the second floor. That's why I was saying they could be similar. It kind of ties it together, maybe.
Correct. I just wanted to, if that's what we were discussing, and she was concerned about cost, and I was wondering what the offset would be if you didn't use those limestone columns all the way down and just at the door. Okay.
There's one other thing that the limestone helped us with, and that's, as I mentioned before, there's no rain screen on this building. The brick is glued right to the face of that concrete, and it's right on the property line. So by using the limestone and having those columns be one piece, as opposed to, having mortar in between them, we can at least get an inch of a rain screen between that limestone and the existing concrete without encroaching past the property line.
Are there any other questions from the committee? Chair would entertain a motion.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the application without condition.
Do we have a second? Any discussion?
I'd like to just add the comment on that for the sake of discussion that I think this proposed renovation of the building really creates a good presence along the park. And considering that there's not an excessive amount of historic character remaining on this building, then I think recreating it as it was with some improvements of limestone and really the large ground floor storefront windows make a good impression on the park, better than perhaps what's been discussed as alternatives. That's my opinion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, and the motion is to approve without any other modifications. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Opposed?
Okay. Motion approved. Thank you very much. And
Thank you.
congratulations.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. We have item 6B. It's case number SRCA 19-00015 at 21 Southeast 17th Street.
And the applicant is here. This is a proposal for I guess I would say an exciting proposal. I didn't realize Manuel Perez Park existed until we had a demolition a few years ago at the original location. It was very small, and so this establishing the park to be so large and with the memorials a feature that they're having, I think is a fantastic move on the part of the city. So some of you might be familiar with Wiley Post Park, which is currently, you drive up Robinson, I do that twice a day. And so they're taking that portion of Wiley Post that's on the east side of Robinson, and they are combining it with what was referred to as an unnamed parkland, all the way up to here. And of course, it was so large, we had to call on our drone pilot, and so Cameron went out and we took some fantastic shots. And this is right along the river. And so we have Robinson here on the right. You have Shields here on the left. So that's the one feature that you can't forget about is the elevated shields, and part of the proposal is right up next to it and underneath it, which is kind of cool. It's not wasted space. And part of it is also, this is the skate park, which was designed for BMX, and they're going to be adding a feature to it that's more for skateboards. And so the basketball, futsal courts is here. I pointed here where the hand is. And then you see the trail along the bottom. And this is looking back more, and you can see the feed mill, which we saw in the last case, but we're much closer here, and the railroad tracks are at this location. And so then we looked the other direction, and we're looking over Shields and the railroad track, and here is the where the Memorial Plaza is going in that circular drive that's already there. And this is more at the east end, and I was joking because I went down a road and ended up right on the edge of the trail because the gate was open, and I didn't realize, I had not been back there before, and so that was kind of down this route. But you can see the trail along the river, and I'm pointing to where that circle is, and you're looking back towards Robinson. And so this area is so large, this was really the only way I could show it. And staff, we pointed out several things. We're recommending approval. The only issue really was with trees, and Scenic River is unlike any of the other districts. It has its own tree list, in addition to the streets and trees of Oklahoma City. And so we ran into this when we did the 1,000 trees that you might remember along the trails, and they had selected trees that were not on the list. And obviously, they have landscape professionals that are saying these are the, we're going to use these and we know they're going to work. And so staff had no problem with them telling us that. And so we just had to include that for you. But Brandon is here from the Parks Department to answer questions or whatever.
Just a couple things to add into it. Brandon Boydson, Oklahoma City Parks. As the department went through a lot of work and coordination and development of the concepts and design of this with the neighborhood and the Friends of Manuel Perez and dealing with the memorial, the styling of it. And so there's been a lot of neighborhood involvement all the way through this process. And so, it's not kind of keep that in mind as we're going through this, is that's had a lot of that involvement and input from the neighborhood. So, and then again, back to Laura's comment about the only deviation as far as, as what's written out, it'd be the landscaping and the trees. Again, as our practice, we run all of our tree selection for any of our projects past our forestry group for their buy-in and their input as to what we're needing as a park department overall for canopy type and diversity, to making sure that it is appropriate selection for that site as well as for our department. So.
And I apologize, when I was researching, I came across a lot of articles about meetings with Capitol Hill organizations and Hispanic organizations that were involved, and then relocating the plaque that had, the original plaque had been stolen. It got replaced from Manuel Perez Park, and relocating that to this park. And so I'm sure there will be a lot of involvement with the grand opening of all of that, but there is a lot of articles out there about this project.
It is a very exciting project. Glad to see something finally going in the area, especially east of Shields. We had designed that parking and trail system almost 20 years ago, and so it's nice to see that further development is coming. So is this project ready to bid, or?
Okay, so we had a little bit of background as far as how this went. We actually put this out for bid a year ago. Bids came in high. We rebid it. We only had one bidder, so we had to go back and we split the project apart. So the project for bidding purpose is split into two pieces, the piece on the east side, the memorial side, and then the more athletic side, the piece on the west side of Shields. So currently, the eastern piece has been bid and is approved. The construction start is pending approval of this body and getting the CA. So it's ready to go. It's sitting on the shelf, waiting, chomping at the bit to finally get this thing up and going, if that is the direction that this body decides to move toward. The other piece, the western piece of it, that is utilizing the shadow and the overcast of the Shields Boulevard, is in process of going out for bid currently for construction numbers. And so again, assuming that whatever direction this body decides, if this is approved, then that one will be right on the heels going behind the other side. So there'll be two separate projects as far as construction goes, but the entire design is very cohesive and connected.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Yep.
Are there any other questions for Brandon from the committee? Are there any citizens that would like to be heard concerning the park? Would you please come forward?
Good morning.
Good morning.
I only have one question. I'm on the east of that land. I got a little property there.
Do you mind stating your name and address, please?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
My name is Jose Alfredo Lopez, and I'm in, I think it's at 201 Southeast 17, just across the creek. The construction on this wonderful program is already started west of me, west of the creek. I'm on the east of the creek right away. But the only question I got is that it's an old, how do you call those oil things, those pumps?
Oh, you mean where they a pump jack where they drilled a well?
It's one in that land, but part of it is in a creek already. And I have not been able to find out how could we get it out of there. It's a big old piece of concrete in a creek where they're working on right now.
Okay. So
Okay.
it's on the other side.
I'm not sure that this body can answer that question as far as what you'd like to have done with it, or have it removed, or?
I already cleaned the land, but I can't do nothing there. It's not up to me. But I have not been able to find out who do I go to.
Oh, I see.
This thing has been abandoned for 30 years since I've been in that area.
Okay.
But nobody seemed to have an answer for it.
I know there's a state agency that deals with abandoned. I see the commercials all the time. So I'm going to give you my card, and I will try.
Sorry.
No,
that's okay.
This program is an awesome program. We've been waiting for a long time.
Well, thank you for your question.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Are there any other questions for Brandon? With that, Chair would entertain a motion. Do we have a second? So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion? Aye. Any opposed? None? Motion approved.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Brandon. Okay. Item 7, other business. We need to elect a chair. Any nominations?
I'd motion to nominate Scott Howard, if you're interested.
Any other nominations? Is that something we have to vote on? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll have to be a motion and a second.
Okay.
And then-
Second?
And then a vote.
Okay.
Okay, so Dana did the second. Okay.
Any discussion? Please, any discussion? No, just kidding. All in favor of
Aye.
chair? Aye. Any opposed? None. All right. Motion approved. B, we need to elect a vice chair. Any nominations?
I'd like to nominate Dana Templeton.
Do you accept or decline?
I'm going to decline at this point.
Okay. I will make a nomination for John Postic to continue as vice chair. Are you willing?
I would accept.
Okay. Very good. Do we have a motion for? Oh, I made the nomination. Yeah, there you go. All right. It's been a long morning. Any discussion? All in favor of John as vice chair?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. John, you will see you in that seat next year. Item 7C, resolution recognizing Mike Voorhees.
Unfortunately, he couldn't make it today, but he knows this was on it, and we're going to be mailing him. I think we got everybody's signature that's here. We'll be mailing that to him.
Okay.
So he's back on the Board of Adjustment. So that's why we lost.
Okay. All right. So would you like me to?
I think we're,
Yeah, there would be a motion and a second.
Okay. All right. We need a motion.
I move to approve the resolution commending Mike Voorhees.
Do we have a second? Second. Okay. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion? Aye. Any opposed?
thank you.
Very good. Well, would you like me to read this, or how is that normally done?
I don't think you have to.
Okay.
If you're working on something for Toastmasters and you need to get there and get some practice in, go right ahead.
No, that's okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Item A, communications. Item A, administrative approval report, nothing. Item B, comments from planning department staff.
We have a meeting in December. I've already heard from one of you that you won't be able to make it, so please check your calendars. We will be getting in touch with you to confirm that we have a quorum,
Okay.
since we do actually have a project that has to come before you and will need action, and we prefer not to delay them because we can't get a quorum.
Okay. Thank you, Laura.
The other thing I want to say is watch your emails. Hopefully you will soon be getting a save this date for the committee commission training that Lisa puts together. We don't have that date locked in yet, but we should be sending something out to you soon, so watch for that.
Okay, thank you. Any comments from committee members? None. Next meeting date, December 5th. And with that, we'll call this meeting adjourned. Thank you.